So let's continue on. We have been the last few weeks talking about angels. We've talked about who they are, and then also if you look in scriptures how they are classified. We've talked about the archangels, Michael, Gabriel. We've talked about cherubims, seraphims, and their different levels of basically what they do. Again, as we were sharing, I think it was last week, that you have the angels that basically will have it's 4 faces, and then out of there they also have the ones have 4 wings, which only have 1 face, and then you have the other ones which have the 4 faces, which have 6 wings, 2 on the back, 2 to cover basically the face, and then 2 to also cover their feet. And so we were talking. So Jose, you want to start us in prayer? We'll go that way. You want to pray? So we finished up talking last week. We were actually, I think we were talking about Isaiah, where he was, a seraphim came and basically ministered to him. And again, when you look at the Bible, a lot of times, we talk, a lot of times people will talk about guardian angels and things like that. But yet at the when you look through scriptures, you will find angels ministering to people. You will also find when Jesus was in the wilderness, he was ministered to by the angels that came down and ministered to him. And so it stands to reason that basically when God says that he is the same yesterday, today, and forever, he also created angels are created beings, just as we are created, but they were created once they fell. There was no redemption for the ones that fell, but there was still 2/3 that did not fall. And so he still has this one group of angels, basically, that are there to minister to us. And a lot of times you'll hear people say, beware, because you may be entertaining angels unaware. And so we always talk about, when Daniel had prayed, and he kept praying and praying and praying and praying. And it was talking in the book of Daniel when it said at the eve, in the King James it says at the evening oblation, and the word oblation meant, of course, the evening prayer. If you remember, in the Jewish custom, they prayed at 6 o'clock in the morning, at noon, and at evening. So they prayed every 6 hours, and then they slept from whatever time they finally went to bed. I don't think they went to bed at 6 o'clock, but somewhere in there they probably went to bed maybe about 9 or so, as soon as the lamps went out, and then they got up at the crack of dawn at 6 and got their prayers going and stuff. But it said that as he was praying on the 21st day in the evening, that the angel came to him to deliver the response of his prayer request that he had, that he was delivering the response that God had sent him 21 days ahead of time. So as soon as Daniel had prayed, God was delivering the answer to Daniel, but yet Daniel says, well, what took you so long? And he says, you don't understand. There is a war, there is a battle that is going on between where God is and where you are. And at the moment that you prayed, God sent me to deliver that. And I have been fighting for 21 days trying to deliver this message to you. And I've been having to fight against, the forces of Satan. And Michael came and helped me in this war and in this battle, so that I could get here and to deliver the message that God wanted you to have. So here's the message. Now I've got to go back and help fight in the battle, and then subsequently go back to God and get his marching orders, whatever they were, and then come back and deliver to somebody else, and going forth. But sometimes when we look at angels, they're looked at different forms in different ways. And one of the things that the Bible tells us is that angels are actually living creatures. And so tonight we're going to start, if you would, and all of these verses are actually going to be found in the book of Revelation. Okay? So we're going to start in Revelation chapter 4 in verses 6 through 9. Okay? This is right after Jesus had given to John the 7 letters for each of the churches. He had just finished giving him the last letter, which was to the church of Laodicea. And if you remember, he said to the church at Laodicea, he said, hey, I wish that you were either hot or cold, but you're not. He says, I don't know which way you're going, because you're really lukewarm. Which basically is saying, I don't know if you're for me or against me, because you just seem to be riding the fence. And he says, and because of this, he says, I'm going to spew you out of my mouth, because you basically make me sick. And sometimes, there's different interpretations of what he's saying there, but it's right after the finishing there of chapter number 3, that now he says, okay, here, I'm going to now give you, John, a vision of what heaven's going to look like. And I'm going to let you see things as they unfold. And so this is where he begins to start. And after here, you'll see him saying that he looked up, and when he did, he saw that there was an open door into heaven. And so God has given him a glimpse of what is there. And so if you go to verse number 6 and down through verse number 9. So I think we had kind of started in here. But when you begin to look at this, he says, okay, first of all, they're living, which means they're breathing, they're able to see, and certain other things here, as you also see, they begin to talk. And he says that here's what he saw. He said he saw these 4 living creatures. And you look at it, he says they were covered with what? They had eyes all over them. And again, sometimes when you think about these things, a lot of times when we get pictures of angels, they're absolutely fascinating and beautiful and all of these things. And now all of a sudden you're getting a picture, and you think about it for a minute. Here's this picture of something that is living, and they have eyes all over them. Not only do they have eyes all over them, they have 4 heads. And each head looked different. It was a cattle, an ox, a lion, and an eagle. And again, when you remember in Scripture, it tells us, each of these had a certain characteristic. And they meant something. When you talk about the lion, was the power, the throne. You talk about the eagle, which is being able to, to fly and soar, through there. Then you talked about the ox, which was one of also of strength, but working together. And so you begin to see all of these things, that are happening. And he said that each of them had eyes all over them. They had wings. But there's something fascinating about them. It said they did not sleep. And they kept doing something all day and all night. They were just praising God the whole time, nonstop. Okay? And so sometimes, we all have these fascinations and these dreams and everything that we talk about, that when I get to heaven, I can't wait to see this person or that person. I can't wait to talk to this person or talk to this person and to do all these things. And yet what I find here is that these angels, they really weren't communicating with each other. They were praising God. Their whole purpose was to bring glory to God. That's what they were created for. And you think about it for a minute, what were we created for? The same thing. Was so that God would get glory from us. And the things that we do are not meant for our glory. The things that we do are meant so that God gets glory. So sometimes when we get so fascinated, boy, I can't wait till, I can finally relax and get done with all of this stuff. And I'm just going to take it easy. I don't think we are. I really, truly believe that we are going to be so fascinated by God and so grateful and thankful for what He's done for us that it's probably going to be an eternal, if you want to call it a praise chorus, constantly just singing. And this is one of the things that I always, when I hear somebody talking about, I don't like those praise choruses because all they do is just repeat themselves all the time. And I keep saying, you don't like that? No. Then what are you going to do in heaven? You're going to sit over in your corner and sing Amazing Grace by yourself? Because everybody else is going to be saying the same thing. We talk, he says, here's what they were saying. Holy, 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 Lord God the Almighty, who was, who is, and who is to come. That's all they said. They had a very limited vocabulary. Or they had a great vocabulary, but it was very limited to what they needed to say. They didn't need to say a whole bunch of anything else. Everything that they were doing was bringing glory to God, which was what they were originally intended to do, and that's what they were continuing to do here. When John gets this look to see what's there. Go down into the 5th chapter in the 8th verse. So when Jesus took the scroll, remember they said, okay, who's worthy? Who is it? Who is worthy to take the scroll that has got God's seal on it to be able to unwrap this, to let us see what's going to unfold. And he said, and then what did he see? He said he saw the four living creatures, which were what was there in the first part of chapter 4. And then it says, then there were the 24 elders who fell down before the Lamb, who's the Lamb? Jesus. And what did they have? They had these bowls filled with incense and all the prayers of the saints. And you think about it for a minute. Back in the Old Testament, you would have the priest who would come into the presence of God or into the Holy of Holies. And what would they offer up? They would take, basically the incense, which was supposed to be for the prayers of the people. And they would burn the incense, and so when they were outside, the people were looking, they would see this puff coming up out of the tent. Which basically, if you remember, sometimes what do we say? We'll sing the song. There's the one song that says, "May my prayer be a sweet smell unto you," or something. It's a praise chorus that we sang a long time ago. But so many times, that's what we're asking for, God, is every time that I pray, may the Holy Spirit lead, guide, and direct so that it comes to our high priest, which is Christ, taking our prayers so they become a sweet smell to God. So that if it becomes a sweet smell, it becomes pleasing to Him. So that what we do is we find favor with Him, so that there's this response, And again, the response may not always be what we want it to be, but the response will be what He wants it to be. In delivering to us. Go down to Revelation chapter 6, and we're going to actually read from verse 1 through verse 7. Yeah, chapter 6, 1 through 7. Yes. Through 7. Yeah. So when you look here, you'll see in verse 1, verse 3, verse 5, and verse 7, it starts talking about the first 4 of the 7 seals. And as one seal is opened, you'll find that one of the living creatures begins to make Um, like here in verse number 1, one of the four living creatures say with a voice like thunder, "Come." Verse number 3, when he opened the second seal, I heard the second living creature say, "Come." When he opened the third one, the third living creature said, "Come." When it got to the fourth one, I heard the voice of the fourth living creature say, "Come." Each one of these seemed to have a very, very specific task that they were going to do. It wasn't that any creature, had this. And you think about this for a minute. Lucifer was the one that basically was like the ultimate authority. Okay? And some believe that what it was if he had not fallen, this would have been his task. But since he had fallen, God says, okay, you're no longer going to do this. Here, I'm divvying this out. So now he's got these four living creatures who are going to be able to do this. As each seal is opened, each one of them are going to make a proclamation. Hey, I need you to come look and see. I'm inviting you here. And it's almost like this is their task. They're kind of like the cherubim and the seraphims, but totally different, and again, in what they're doing. If you remember the cherubims, they were there and basically guarding the Garden of Eden, two of them, making sure that nobody would ever come in there again, and see things. So when you begin to look at these things, they're going to announce, okay, what's going to happen. Now, when you look at the four faces again, they were what? A lion, an eagle, and a calf. Okay. So, again, each one of those are different characteristics. But can I also tell you that if you go back into the four Gospels and you look at the four Gospels, each one of the Gospels will actually will present Jesus as something. Matthew, for instance, Matthew presents Jesus as the what? Matthew gives the life of Jesus, starting at his birth. Okay? And so, who is he? He is called the Lion. He's called the Lion of Judah. So if you go back and look in the book of Matthew, when you go back and you look in the book of Matthew, you will find that Matthew presents Christ as the Lion of Judah. When you go into the book of Mark, Mark will present Jesus as kind of a lowly ox. Again, an ox was someone to carry your burdens. And what does Jesus tell us that he's going to do? Yeah. He says, "Come unto me, all you that labor and heavy laden, and I will give you rest." He says, take my burden upon you because they're light. And so Mark presents him as the one to carry our burdens. So when you see each of these living creatures, we talked about the Lion of Judah in Matthew. We talk about the ox that is in Mark. And then Luke, when you look at Luke presents him as the perfect man. Okay? So when you're beginning to look and see, Again, we were the lion, the ox, and the man, and the eagle. And Luke presents him as a perfect man. No spot, no blemish. Luke gives us all of the details about Christ. When you begin to look through the book of Luke and the stories that he talks about, for instance, the prodigal son, you see a lot of the parables that are there where he healed a lot of people. He would come into town and with compassion. He was casting out demons. He was healing the sick, raising the dead. And when you begin to look in the book of Luke, you find that again, he did all of these things without no sin. And then so when you come to the book of John, of course, you know, a lot of times we talk about presents Christ as kind of he always was is talking about John would be the beloved disciple and coming from a different viewpoint. And so what John does is if you go back and look at how he presents him as like a godlike eagle. He's always soaring. He's getting a view of all of it. He isn't just getting a small snapshot. He's soaring above everything, being able to encompass everything. And so when you begin to look in the book of John, you talk about a godlike eagle. He's talking more or less about, as we look in the book of John, it talks about his love. Even though he sees everything and knows everything, he's still loving and not stopping. He is. And so when you begin to see some of these things, you know, that are going on, again, I find it fascinating that when you see how he describes each one of these and their characteristics, it was not just, oh, well, here they are. Everything was absolutely fitting together perfectly. It was not by chance that he had these angels, each with a certain characteristic about them that was different than the other ones. And then when you go back into four different views, if you would, of Christ, sometimes they would tell the same story of the same event, but from a different perspective. And sometimes people would say, well, why is it that it says this here and this one and this here and another? It wasn't that they were disagreeing with each other. Each one of them were looking from a different perspective of a view of Christ, trying to give us the perfect view of who Christ is. We can't just take one view and say, this is who he is. We have to take all of the picture. And when we see all of the picture, it also helps to give us a view of who God is. And sometimes people don't understand that. Remember, the Bible tells us that Jesus is God in the flesh. So the characteristics that we see of Christ are characteristics of who God is. And so many times when people say, I just don't understand who God is, well, I can take you through the Gospels and show you who he is. And those characteristics that would make him complete with these four angels. And the four angels are also characteristics of God, which also says that God made us in his own image, which says these are the characteristics that he wants us to have. Jesus prayed. He said, he was talking to Peter and him. He says, listen, Satan has asked to sift you like the wheat. But I've prayed, and I'm praying for you. And not only for you, I'm praying for those others which are to come, that they will be like us, Father, like you and I are one, that they would be one. And that is his, we're talking, we talk about so much of a divided world and divided churches and divided religions and whatever. What God is trying to say to us, I wish that you could all be one like we are. Understanding that I love you unconditionally. I don't love you based upon what you do. I love you because you're my child. And so he says, this is the way we should do these things. So let's talk about some angels that are going to be ruling. So let's go to Ephesians chapter 1 and verse number 21. Ephesians chapter 1, verse 21.
Far above every ruler and authority, power and dominion, and every title given, not only in this age, but also in the one to come.
Yeah. So what I'm going to give you is some verses, and you're going to, if you go back and read the whole picture, you're going to see that they're angels, talking about angels. And these angels are ruling over certain things, okay? Ephesians chapter 3, verse number 10.
This is so that God's multifaceted wisdom may now be made known through the church to the rulers and authorities in heaven.
To the rulers and the authorities in heaven. Okay? Colossians chapter 1, verse number 16. I'll have to give you this outline with all these scriptures. That's my project for next week. So when you begin to look at these, and they start talking about ruling over principalities. And so, who's this also kind of sound like? Huh? Satan. Yeah, Satan wants to be a ruler over principalities and dominions, powers of darkness. These are the things that he wants. But the problem is he doesn't have them because God is saying that here are others that have rule over principalities, powers. He talked about thrones, that were there, authorities, dominion, and might, okay? And so when you begin to look at all of these things, it's almost like they lead from a private to a general. They're over this little bit. The next one's over a little bit more, and the next one more, the next one more, and the next one more. It's a level of authority that they are given, and you think about it. So many times, if I go back to Moses, when he was leading the children through the wilderness, and it's his his father-in-law was watching him, because what would happen is they were set up, and so everybody would be there, and they would all have to come to Moses for Moses to make decisions. He was the one in charge. And so everybody would get up early in the morning and get in line, present their case to Moses, and Moses would make a decision and they would go home. Well, the problem was he wasn't getting to the end of the line. So the next day he had to come and get somebody else. And the next day somebody else. And the next day, maybe they would finally get there, or maybe they wouldn't. And Jethro came up to me and said, Moses, what are you doing? He said, you're killing your people. They get up early in the morning, they stand out in the hot heat, waiting to get an audience with you. And many times they don't get him. So Moses, what you need to do is you need to get you, I think it was like 10 men or something, and make them rulers over this amount of people. And then you need to get some more and make them rulers over this. And then you need to get some more and make them rulers over this. Because you can't do it all. You might have 5 or 10 underneath you. And then there's all these others that are down here that also have 10 and 10 and 10 and 10, or however you want to break it out, so that you'll be able to do these things. And it's like God saying, okay, here, I've got all of you angels, and we've got to cover all of this. But you can't just cover parts of it. I need to have you cover this, you cover these groups, one leading up to it. To me, it's almost like an organizational chart. And they had assignments. So many times people just, and this is the whole thing, that sometimes people just think angels are out there floating around like, it's oh, got an assignment, let's go. They don't understand that angels, again, God created everything in a perfect order. It was not a mishmash of things. He had a plan from the very beginning. And in that plan, he has an order to that plan in order to be carried out. And if you remember, he even said the same thing to us. He said, even before you were in your mother's womb, I knew you. I knew your makeup. I knew everything about you. I could even call you by name and tell you what your personality is going to be like. That was my plan for you. To fit in this plan that I have, that is a perfect plan for all generations of all times, until the time that we're going to shut this thing down. And sometimes we fail to realize that we aren't the only ones fitting in this plan. There's also angels out there that are in charge of certain things that are part of that plan. And so many times it's like, boy, I sure wish I could figure out what it was that God wanted me to do. They don't have to figure out. They got it. The good thing about it is that they can actually see God face to face, in this thing. Okay. So how am I doing? Doing okay. All right. So let's get to one, which is guardian angels. And they are mentioned in the Bible, okay? First one is found in Matthew chapter 18 and verse number 10. So see to it that you don't despise one of these little ones. Because why? You ever realize that when Satan wants to mess with you, he's not just messing with you. He says, you're messing with their angels. See that you despise one of these little ones. Because if you do, he says that in heaven, their angels do always behold the face of my Father, which is in heaven. They're there to take care of us. You'll find it another place in Hebrews chapter 1 and verse number 14. Are there not ministering spirits, okay, set out to do what? To minister or to serve? What is a minister? A minister is a servant. Do you not know that there are ministering spirits that are set out to minister to those who are heirs of salvation? Who is that? That's his children. So he says, okay, now again, the Bible doesn't tell us that each of us have a guardian angel. Everybody wants to say, oh, I've got a guardian angel, I don't know. But I do know one thing, that just as Christ had angels that minister to him, there are times that God's angels come and minister to us. And you think about it. Have you ever come to a point in time in your life you're really struggling, and you're sitting there, and you are? It's like it's almost like a continuous prayer. God, I'm really torn here. There's this decision. And they both seem right. If I was to take pros and cons, they may be the same pros and they may be the same cons. So where do I go? Or I'm just hurting. I'm just struggling here. And I see these paths, that are laid out before me, and I really don't want to go down the wrong one. I really want to please you. I really want to serve you. I want to do what's right. And then it's like you just finish that prayer, and then almost like maybe sometimes you just go to sleep, or just all of a sudden there just comes this peace that just seems to just flood you. And it's almost like, God, it's almost like I can feel the presence of Christ right there. It's almost like you're whispering in my ears. You've got the reins. You've got control. I've totally surrendered. And you realize that, just as Jesus was going through his temptation in the desert, he was looking for, okay, God, what is it you want me to do? I know what you've called me to do. And now it's that time. Help me. And then I don't know about you, but I believe that in the Garden of Gethsemane, when Jesus was crying and weeping and praying that night, he had brought his friends along to pray with him and to keep watch. And he's really, in everything that he had, praying to the Father. Father, if there's any other way that we can do this, let this cup pass from me. But not my will, but your will be done. God, what do you want me to do? I believe the angels were there ministering to him. I believe they were giving him the strength that he needed for that moment to make the most difficult decision he ever had to make. Even though he knew that's where he was going. From the day he was born. But yet I believe that the angels were there ministering to him then too. If you remember, he went back to his disciples and he said, couldn't you just stay awake for an hour? Couldn't you just watch for me? And then he goes back and prays some more. He comes back and they're still asleep. And he tells them, go ahead. Stay asleep. You'll be okay. Why? Because I believe that God, through his angels, had spoke to his son at that time, to give him the peace that he needed in that moment. Because when they came to take him, his disciples wanted to go to war. And even in the midst of all of that, Jesus heals the one guard's ear. Even in the midst of all of being betrayed, he still turned around and he still loved Judas. And then when one of the ones that loved him a lot was the spokesman of the group, cursed him and everything out, he turned around and looked at him with it. Just the look that only Jesus could give of compassion. That just broke down the feelings that Peter had. And sometimes everything falls apart. But sometimes we fail to realize that God told us, he said, listen, I go away. Or Jesus said, I go away, but I will send another comforter that will be with you. And he's here ministering every day with us. And so, when we look at the angels, their responsibilities are awesome. They really are. And that's why, to me, I look at all of this, and as I put it all together and everything, I just say, you know what, man? God has to be awesome to have put all of this together in such a perfect, down to the small, minute details. He didn't leave anything to chance. And so we just say thank you. Here we are. All right. So this finishes this part of the service. So need you to do me a favor, Jose. Out there are some gloves. So if you'll just get